Hello and welcome to Firstpost Africa, where we get you stories from the continent and from across the world. I am Joshua Barnes, live from the Firstpost studios. First, let's take a look at the headlines. US President Donald Trump calls his meeting with Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping a great success. The duo agreed to a one-year truce following a trade war. Demand for gold hits a record high in the third quarter amid a global trade war and geopolitical tensions, as the precious metal is seen as a safe haven investment. Nepal's newly appointed interim leader Sushila Karki holds talks with political leaders and youth representatives for the first time after deadly anti-corruption protests toppled the previous government last month. And Lebanese President Joseph Aoun orders armed forces to confront any incursions by Israel after an Israeli raid killed a Lebanese municipal worker in the country's south. Let's first focus on the turmoil in the East African nation of Tanzania, where protests erupted against President Samia Suluhu Hassan on voting day, with many feared dead. Now, as the vote count is underway, police have imposed an evening curfew in the country's biggest city. This as hundreds of protesters hit the streets in Dar es Salaam and clashed with police. Police fired tear gas to disperse crowds. In response, the protesters pelted stones. Demonstrators torched a police station and tore down posters of the Tanzanian president to protest an election without opposition. Protesters chanted, "We want our country back," while demonstrating against Hassan. Internet watchdog NetBlocks also reported nationwide connectivity disruption as citizens cast their votes. This was also corroborated with other reports of a digital blackout in the country, amid a low voter turnout. The Human Rights Watch said that Tanzanian authorities have suppressed the political opposition and critics of the ruling party. The group also accused the government of suppressing the media and failing to ensure the independence of the Electoral Commission.
The ruling party and its government have described as an election, but a majority of Tanzanians do not see it as such. They see it as a performance staged to create an illusion of democratic process, which in fact is not the case. It is actually Samia against Suluhu.
These disruptions on voting day occurred despite Hassan's promise to ensure security. Addressing an election rally, Hassan said the authorities were well prepared to hold the polls. She also warned the opposition, whose candidates failed to contest, against disturbing the election.
Let us participate in the election without any fear, because the security and defense forces of Tanzania are ready and are working to ensure the safety of the country and its citizens before, during, and even after the election.
Hassan was elevated from the vice president's office in 2021 after the death of her iron-fisted predecessor, John Magufuli. The 65-year-old is slated to secure her maiden presidential election win. What's worth noting, though, is that all of Hassan's rivals are either jailed or disqualified. Her main challenger, Tundu Lissu, is on trial for treason. While Lissu potentially faces the death penalty, his party, Chadema, is barred from running. Another serious contender, Luhaga Mpina, is also disqualified.
Many of us who are in the opposition politics, especially the leadership of Chadema, have almost all gone into hiding. So that is the current status as we speak. So you could actually see what sort of election, so-called election we are having. Someone trying to entrench her authoritarianism by trying to intimidate people, by trying to crack down on those who are, or to crack down on the dissenting voices.
And it's not just the opposition that fears the government's crackdown. There are fears that even members of the ruling party are being targeted. Despite reports of repression, the country's first female leader, Hassan, is almost certain to retain her chair in the presidential office. The final seal to her victory can only come after the vote count is completed. For more on this story, we have with us Dr. Mohamed Makame, Vice-Chancellor of State University Zanzibar in Tanzania. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much. Speaking from Zanzibar in Tanzania, thank you a lot.
Absolutely. Let's start off by looking at the absence of opposition representation. Do you think that this undermines President Hassan's expected election win, and how could it influence her next term?
I think it would be inaccurate to claim a complete absence of opposition representation in the 2015 general election, given that 11 registered opposition parties field the presidential candidates. But yes, we agree that in this election, it marked by the notable absence of the major competitive opposition, as the two largest opposition parties, Chadema and ACT Wazalendo, were either disqualified or choosing to boycott the process. Now, mentioning of Chadema, which is Tanzania's largest opposition party, seems it boycotted the presidential election, citing the demand for electoral reforms and the slogan for no election, no reforms, no election. Now, it is a question that can be raised from the political party itself, even if claiming that it has its leader, Tundu Lissu, being trial for treason. But of course, when it comes to issues of law, we understand that there's a due process of law. And if this is in a question, then the party was in a position to look for a right leader to contest the election. As per the ICT Wazalendo, it becomes the second largest opposition party in Tanzania. So its presidential candidates, Luhanga Mpina, disqualified by the Independent National Electoral Commission by the reason of violating or otherwise confronting some procedures of contesting the presidency candidacy in Tanzania. So having 10 opposition parties contesting for presidents alongside with the Chama cha Mapinduzi, Samia Suluhu Hassan, it's an evident that the opposition representation is there. Even when noting that the major opposition parties have been either boycotting or disqualified. We can note, however, that the unrest has a claim of constitutional imbalances and exclusion, which have tested the national unity. As the protests are going on, the President Samia Suluhu, from her party manifesto, has promised constitutional reforms within the next 5 years. Of course, her administration will be under scrutiny to deliver on its own commitment, which seems to be wanted and also supported by her 4R philosophy, which is reconciliation, resilience, reforms, and rebuilding. We anticipate that within this term of 5 years, President Samia Suluhu will rebuild the nation within understanding of her 4R philosophy that will bring about changes in political and democracy in Tanzania.
Yes, let's move now to the protests that are taking place, of course. Do you see these continuing potentially after a result is announced? And what could that mean for stability in the nation?
Well, the unrest following the 2015 general elections, particularly in major cities like Dar es Salaam, Arusha, and other areas, has raised a serious concern about the national cohesion and regional ripple effect. Of course, the protest may persist if underlying grievances remain unsolved. But the state's current effort to restore peace, some initiatives like night curfews, undergoing investigation, and a public reassurance aiming at preventing evacuation, preventing escalation of the unrest, and that would safeguard the regional stability. But of course, these measures reflect a dual strategy, which is immediate commitment of unrest and a gradual institutional reform. However, the sustainability of peace depends on whether the promise of reform are inclusive, transparent, and timely conducted. Engaging youth opposition voices to continue feeling marginalized even after these efforts, it will of course affect the potentially affect not only in Tanzania, but even stability within the East African region cooperation. So Tanzania is a key player in the East African community. The unrest could disrupt the regional cooperation, and the efforts of maintaining peace and order is not just a domestic initiative, but is supposed to be a regional act by all actors within the region. We understand that there's a lot that had been done by Tanzania in settling issues within the region. This unrest, of course, will take the same lead that Tanzania in cooperating with the regional cooperation may resolve the unrest in no time.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, that election result we wait for, we expect a result, but lots of questions still to be answered, not just now, but over the next 5 years, as you mentioned. Dr. Mohamed Makame, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Next, we shift our focus to Cameroon. In the wake of 92-year-old President Paul Biya's election victory, the opposition are vowing to continue resisting the result until what they call final victory. Protests in the Central African nation have continued following the 12th of October election victory for the world's oldest head of state. The demonstrations have turned violent, with deaths and arrests reported after protests against an election verdict that is being scrutinised by many within Cameroon and across the continent. Paul Biya has ruled the African nation since 1982. He could be in power until just shy of his 100th birthday. Critics have accused President Biya of using state institutions to cling on to power. Opposition leader Issa Chamora Bakari has remained defiant in his claims that he won this month's election.
The truth of the ballot is clear. We won this election by a large majority. This victory is not mine alone, it belongs to the Cameroonian people.
Now, Cameroon has a median age of just 19, with much of the population feeling their voice is not heard by the current government. On Wednesday morning, Chiroma took to the streets of Douala, strewn with burnt tyres and debris after days of unrest. Despite a firm response to protests, Chiroma's supporters remain defiant.
Chaque année, on tue les élections, ils sont en train de tuer les élections. Non Bissau, Chiroma, on dit non Bissau. On vote pour quoi? Moi j'ai perdu mon temps pour aller voter par rapport à quoi? Alors je vous demande, pourquoi les gens perdent leur temps pour aller voter? Parce que je vote mon candidat, après il passe, on dit qu'il n'est pas passé.
Douala, Cameroon's largest city and economic capital, has seen some of the worst violence. The governor of the region says that at least 200 people have been arrested, with security personnel injured and so-called attackers killed. Cameroon's government has hit out at Chiroma for inciting violence and rebellion after the opposition leader declared victory before the official result was released. The Interior Minister said that small groups under the influence of drugs had looted shops and set fire to public buildings. However, no evidence was given on the claim of drug use. Meanwhile, civil society groups Stand Up for Cameroon said that protesters and civilians who have been arrested were being held in inhumane conditions. The group also says since the weekend, 23 people have been killed as security forces cracked down on protesters. This came as a video circulating on social media appears to show security forces loading a motionless body onto the back of a military truck. Chants of "Give back the corpse" can be heard in the clip. As Chiroma vows to not back down, calling on supporters to stay mobilised, security forces are continuing to counter protests with violence taking hold in multiple cities. Will the growing unrest threaten President Paul Biya's disputed stranglehold on power? We will keep you updated on this developing story. Let's now shift focus to the West African nation of Burkina Faso, where the Ibrahim Traoré-led junta is making sweeping electoral reforms. Now, the Transitional Assembly has approved the dissolution of the Independent National Electoral Commission. Under the new law, the country's Interior Ministry will organise elections. The junta has also formed a committee to oversee the transfer of the poll body's 104 staff members and material resources. The new law marks a shift from the junta's earlier stance of transitioning to a civilian government within 21 months, a promise made by the military rulers after their takeover in September of 2022. However, in May 2024, the junta extended the period of transition by 5 years until July 2029. They also announced that their leader, Ibrahim Traoré, would be allowed to contest the next presidential election. Back in July, while proposing to scrap the poll body, the junta had described it as a waste of money. The military rulers added that abolishing the body would reinforce its sovereign control over the electoral process. They also accused the commission, which had existed for more than 2 decades, of being susceptible to foreign influence. After their takeover, the country's military rulers have reduced their ties with Western countries. Burkina Faso has significantly reduced engagements with its former coloniser, France. Instead, the junta-led country has turned towards Russia to forge a strategic and economic partnership. In May this year, President Vladimir Putin and Traoré met in Moscow after the country's Victory Day military parade. The duo agreed to step up efforts to combat growing extremism and terrorism, which have gripped the entire Sahel region. When Traoré seized power, he had cited these growing insurgencies as the reason. He overthrew the previous military government because of its alleged failure to fight terrorism. But the junta's efforts to combat terrorism are marred by grave accusations. Rights groups have accused the army of targeting civilians in its attempt to quash the insurgents. They have also accused the military rulers of suppressing political activity and freedom of expression. Critics have also raised questions over the effectiveness of the military's anti-terror operation. According to reports, the attacks by the Al-Qaeda-linked JNIM group have doubled in the first half of 2025 as compared to the number for the same period the year before. Despite the accusations of human rights violations and failed military operations, Burkina Faso's military rulers are continuing with their efforts to delay the election further. And for our final story, there's a new coffee king in town. Uganda has officially taken the caffeine crown from Ethiopia, and it's not just a small sip of success. With bumper crops, government freebies, and a global coffee price surge, Uganda's coffee story has gone from a humble to a full-blown espresso shot for the economy. In September, Uganda's coffee exports jumped by a jaw-dropping 59% compared to last year. They shipped over 800,000 bags of beans. This is up from just over 500,000 during the same period in 2024. That's enough caffeine to keep the entire continent awake for a week. The Agriculture Ministry credits this caffeinated surge to one thing. That's more coffee plantation everywhere. The central and eastern regions are currently reaping a bumper harvest. The result, Uganda raked in a record $2.2 billion from coffee exports in the 12 months to September. That's a 57% jump from the previous year. And this isn't just a one-time buzz. Earlier reports show that Uganda's coffee production in the upcoming 2025-26 crop is expected to surge nearly 15%. That's thanks to new trees maturing and farmers expanding their plantations. The country could soon produce as much as 9.3 million bags of coffee, weighing 60 kilograms each, up from 8.1 million bags last year. A top Agriculture Ministry official summed it up neatly. The major reason is increased planting. That's partly because the government has been treating coffee like gold dust. President Yoweri Museveni's administration has been handing out free coffee seedlings and fertilizers, aiming for a moonshot goal of 30 million bags by 2030. And while most countries are just trying to fix their morning brew, Uganda is quietly building a caffeine empire. Meanwhile, Ethiopia, the traditional birthplace of coffee, is having a bit of an identity crisis. Once the uncontested leader, it has now slipped behind Uganda due to climate shocks and internal conflict. In May of 2025 alone, Uganda shipped over 47,000 tons of coffee, leaving Ethiopia's 43,000 tons trailing behind. Uganda's rise is no accident. A mix of favourable weather, improved quality standards, and strategic government support has helped it become the continent's leading exporter. Today, the East African nation's coffee industry supports more than 1.7 million households and accounted for nearly 30% of its foreign exchange earnings. So while some nations are losing sleep over inflation, Uganda's doing it over coffee, literally, with booming exports, record earnings, and freshly planted hope. The country's turning its morning brew into an economic lifeline. That's it on the show for today. We will see you again tomorrow at the same time. Until then, thank you for watching.
Straight into the roof of the net. Nice one.